Good morning. I'm Pastor Rick, and I want to welcome you to Work Matters with Pastor Will, one of our newest educational programs here at Emmanuel. This morning we're going to look at Bishop Wayne Miller from Chicago. He was here in 2020 and he offered one of the most popular talks at church this year. His theme was living life well, how to live the integrated life. And so he wants to lay out how do we align faith and work. He'll even add in there economics. And he provides a model for how we can do that. That's the first session, and then the second builds off that model. It says, now, how can we integrate our lives based on this model? And he's going to offer the answer that the congregation is one of the most perfect places to model the model. And so now we want to invite Pastor Will to lead us in this very important discussion. Pastor Will?
Thanks, Pastor Rick. Welcome, everyone, to Work Matters with me, Pastor Will. I'm so excited that you could join us today. We've got a great video from the retired bishop of the Metropolitan Synod of the ELCA, Wayne Miller, who visited us a year ago. It's all about living life well. What does it mean to live life well? Furthermore, what does it look like to live life well? Is it based on some internal measurement of how we feel living life is well, or is it based on society around us, or is it something totally different at all? Well, there's one word that I really want you to pay attention to and take from this first episode with Bishop Miller, and that is integration. To live a life well requires living a life of integration. Now, I'm not going to give it away on what that means. You'll have to watch the video. So sit back and relax, enjoy this video, and I'll see you on the other side.
Because even though I am shy about actually calling myself a businessman because of where I was in my career when I was working in business, but it was a wonderful experience for me. And if the seminary itch hadn't come, I would have been very happy making a career in life in business. And during that time, that was my first real awareness of this question of how is it that I connect my life in the business community to my faith life? How do those two things fit together? And so this has become a sort of a recurring theme for me through my life. And when Rick invited me into the conversation about faith, work, and economics, it felt to me like it was something that either I'd been waiting for or it had been waiting for me for a long time. It just took a long time to come to fruition. So obviously I have a perspective on this, and what I want to try to do today is to give you a way of thinking about the relationship between these things. And I'm going to start with what I see as a condition that we live in more and more in our world, which is what I would call the condition of fragmentation. And what I mean by fragmentation is a situation where we're operating in multiple communities, multiple environments all the time, and these things are pulling us apart all the time. So when I was a kid growing up, I grew up in suburban Chicago, but the community, the suburb that I was in was a working class community, it was a blue collar community. It was not, certainly was not religiously homogeneous, but it was not even really culturally homogeneous. And so it was pretty diverse in some ways, but there were sort of assumed standards and ethics of what was right and what was wrong and what was okay and what wasn't. And as I often say, I knew that if I was doing something that was going to get my ears boxed at home, it was also going to get my ears boxed at Bobby Schmidt's house or Stash Lazoviak's house or whoever's house, Debbie Blick's house, whoever it was, because there was an idea of what was right and what was wrong that we shared, regardless of our particular religious affiliation, religious community. And so it was kind of ethically speaking, it was a kind of a homogeneous culture. That situation hardly exists anymore. People really find that difficult to find. There's no standards there's no common sense of how kids are supposed to behave in church. There's no common sense of how people are supposed to behave in church. So people come to church and behave the same way they do at a Cubs game. You know, if they want to get up in the middle and go for refreshments or carry on a conversation, who cares? You know, whatever. And when you first see that, it's like, is this okay or isn't this okay? I mean, this certainly wasn't okay when so there's a lot of disorientation. And so when we're living in a single culture or community environment, that it allows us to live as whole people in relationship with other people that we share things with in terms of standards that we might not ever talk about, we might not ever say. It's just understood. It just isn't done, or it is done. In the situation that we're in now, when we're living in simultaneously in multiple value systems, it leaves many of us feeling disoriented and anxious, schizoid, even violent in some cases, trying to figure out how to make this fit for us. And I think that it leaves us in a state where many of us feel disintegrated. Who are you when you're at home with your family as compared to who you are when you're at work, as compared to who you are when you're at church, as compared to who you are? And they're all you, but they're really different. You behave not quite the same when you're at work as you do when you're with your brothers and sisters. And that sense of disintegration becomes something that in us we look to kind of put back together into a whole person, and that's a big part of what it means to live life well. So that brings us to our fundamental questions. And I think that it is safe to say that when I was a kid, and certainly this has been historically true for the Lutheran Church, that the main function of religious life was to deal with the question of how do I build a right relationship with God. Other parts of my life, the business community, the neighborhood, the political, all that stuff kind of was done by other people. The church had a niche, and the church's role was to work on specifically this relationship with God. And we did that through traditional spiritual practices, worship, traditional structures, and rhythms of communal life. Everybody knew what a church community or committee was. On Thursday nights, if you lived particularly in a small town, on Thursday nights, everybody was at choir practice. Some people were at the Presbyterian church choir practice, and some people were at the Methodist church choir practice, but that's what people did on Thursday nights, right? So the church dealt specifically with that. Now, in this more fragmented society, what I find, and we have lots of research, by the way, that backs this up, just studies of people's attitudes and so forth that we've done. The question is, what does it mean to live life well? So just, won't go into this in great deep depth, but what does it mean to you to live life well? What are some of the components that go into living life well?
Having friends.
Having friends, okay, good. Friendship?
Peace of mind. Being peaceful.
Yeah, being peaceful.
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind.
Being in a warm climate.
Having a family.
Being in a warm climate.
Being in a warm climate. Getting to play golf every morning before breakfast, whatever. And I think for lots of people, because of the way our culture portrays itself to us over and over again, and prosperity, work, success, abundance are for many, many people part, not all, but a part of what it means to live life well. Look at commercials. You know, if you look, regardless of what it's advertising, regardless of what it is, regardless of who lives there, if you actually look at the homes that are portrayed in commercials, there's no way that you could live in a home like that with less than $125,000 a year of income. That's all subliminal. It goes into our minds as this is what it means to live life well, to be able to have a house like this. So that pulls us in the direction, two directions. First of all, it pulls us in the direction in the church of having to be more focused on the intentional integration of faith and the rest of life. We cannot assume that somebody else is doing that. We cannot assume that we can just do the God part and the people will figure out all the rest. We have to be much more explicit about this. And the other thing is that I think in order to do this now in our society, we have to be talking about the relationship between faith, work, and economics, and what that means. So this is what has led me into great interest in the work that Rick has been involved with in this relationship. And as I've worked it through, I've kind of put together a model of the interaction of these things, which I like to do. I'm a visual person, and so models work for me. So this is kind of the picture that I've come up with, and I apologize. I gave this idea to a graphic artist, and they did a lovely job, except that it doesn't project very well because the letters are too light. But what you've got in this very Trinitarian, very Lutheran scheme is 3 circles: faith, work, and economics. And I think that it's the integration of these things. It's not as though faith, work, and economics are bubbles floating around out there in space, and there's some kind of a relationship between them, but we don't know exactly what it is. I think they're inseparably linked in a model. And that what comes out of living more fully into the integration of that model and those 3 elements is that work starts to take on more and more the picture of vocation. That is a call from God to be someone, to do something, and to go somewhere. And vocation in Lutheran tradition is a very important theme, as I'm sure many of you know and you've talked about before if you've been in these classes. Lutherans have a very distinctive angle on this. When Luther wrote about the idea of vocation, he was writing into a social context where vocation was specifically applied to the religious. A vocation was to be a nun or a monk or a priest. Those were the people with vocations. Everybody else was just a poor working slob. Luther sanctified the word vocation by saying, no, vocation is not about God calling you out of the world and into the cloister. God is about pouring you back out into the world as a person of faith. So everything you do out there in the world is vocation, at least potentially vocation. Wonderful stories about that. I'll just tell this one because it's one of my favorites. When I was on internship, I met a man doing pastoral care stuff. I was going around to meet different people in the church, and I met this man and visited him in his home. He was an HVAC guy, did heating and air conditioning. Right? And so we were sitting there having a conversation, and he started to just spin. His eyes lit up. It was amazing. He was so excited to talk to me about this. He started to tell me stories about all the times that he'd gotten calls at 2 o'clock in the morning, and some poor mother, furnace went out, and she was afraid her kids were going to get sick because they were cold, and he would get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and go fix her furnace in the middle of the night. This is a vocation, right? He was not just an HVAC guy. He was a man with a mission. And that mission was, in a very important way, to love and serve your neighbor, which is the other piece of vocation for Luther, is that all of our vocations in whatever arena of our life, whether it's the home, whether it's political life, whether it's business, whether it's politics, whatever, government, the vocation is somehow oriented for a purpose of loving and serving the neighbor.
Living life well. Living the integrated life. A life that integrates faith, work, and economics together in this whole sphere that we call vocation. Your God-given purpose, what God has made you for on this earth, to serve God. And so to live this integrated life, we have to be intentional about it. It's not going to happen on its own. We need to work together. We need to work on our own selves and as a community together to infuse our faith and our life. And we will start to see that if we work together, that this systems of economics, these systems of new creation will begin to flourish through the power of the Holy Spirit. I firmly believe that. Hey, if you want to continue this conversation, hop online and check us out. We're on Facebook. We have 2 pages. One you can search for under Naples Emmanuel. The other one is Emmanuel Community Park, the newest mission development of Emmanuel Lutheran Church, located in East Collier County on a 40-acre property that we have developed a manual for the gift of the community. So I hope you check out either one of those pages. Feel free to drop us a line. We'd love to continue this conversation about living your life well. We'll catch you next time. Take care.